Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another live at the Waterhole with Wild Earth and African. And we've started the afternoon where we spent a lot of time yesterday at Tembe Elephant Park with the aforementioned elephants. But my name is Ben Coley. I will be with you for the next 2 hours, and we will discuss and consider various things that we are viewing and potentially even just thinking about, which is where we need your help. It's live at the Waterhole, so for those of you watching, please remember you can send in your questions and your comments. They will get fed through to me, and I would love to hear what you are thinking, and anything else that is sort of trawling its way through your brain, you can throw in my direction and we can discuss what it is that we're seeing or considering. So this has been a fairly typical scene of late. Many individuals that I'm beginning to recognize here at Tembe, and one young male definitely on the left, but these are all males by the look of it. Classic sort of bachelor group that we would expect from bulls. Very rarely do we seem to see breeding herds at this watering hole at Tembe, although I have no doubt that they are there. But this group of resident bulls seem to spend most of the day here, and why not? What a lovely place. We've got shade, we've got ample water, plenty of dust for dust bathing. Really is a lovely, rather tranquil and paradise-like spot. Good afternoon, Lenny. Thank you for your greetings. Yeah, lovely to catch up with everybody again and say to hear from all of you. It's always lovely to hear where everybody's from as well. A nice reminder that there are so many people watching from so many different walks of life, but all of us sharing a common love for African wildlife and the beauty of it all. As being a Sunday, it is a perfect day to just sit back, take everything slowly, and just soak in all the lovely visuals that we are seeing. It's a very therapeutic thing, and it's sometimes difficult from our perspective as naturalists to remember that we don't have to talk all the time. I'm sure to some of you, you wish we would be quiet a little more than we do, but we do get a bit carried away. But silence and just letting nature do the talking for us is a very important tool from a guiding perspective, knowing when to give information and knowing when to let the animals just do their thing and let people enjoy it for what it is. We do sometimes have to fight the instant gratification sort of world that we live in, and I myself am just as caught up in that sometimes as well. But when you can train yourself to just sit and enjoy, safe in the knowledge that you are not late for anything, you don't have any other pressing engagements, just turning up to a waterhole like this, particularly if you are in the car or have somewhere where you can be seated and just to watch this unfold, sit there with your binoculars and just spend half an hour just watching, listening, smelling, just really becoming one with the environment. It is a wonderful opportunity to use multiple senses. Of course, In this scenario with a camera, we only really have visual and a little bit of audio senses to engage with. But in the real world, there is so much more of it, and it gives a very three, or even you could say five-dimensional in terms of the senses, of course, experience. The splashing of the water, the smell of elephant dung, all sorts of interesting stimuli being carried through the environment in a situation such as this. And lovely to see a very gentle test of strength from these two bulls. These interactions very, very important for later life, for development of muscles, but more importantly for building relationships between individuals that will probably last for life, understanding what it is to be an adult elephant and honing those skills that will be required in later life. This one on the left has got a little bit of a testosterone surge. He's going to try his luck with the next one. You can see that classic stomping pose and the head shaking. The other one does not seem too perturbed, however, practicing his must stomp. And greetings to you, Mercedes Bean, as well. Saying hello to me and everybody in Johannesburg making this possible. I have Morgan with me today in my ear, communicating with, well, acting as a mediator between myself and you, passing on your comments and questions, and she'll be keeping a beady eye on all of our camera locations. And with the help of the tech team, to whom we would be lost without, we'll be bouncing across the various cameras we have available to us all over the country and all over the continent. South Africa, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Kenya. Very lucky to be able to bring you such a great diversity of location and their associated flora and fauna. This big boy's going to come in and just prove to that other one that he's got a little bit of time and growing to come yet. Yeah, or maybe not. Very difficult to explain the sheer size and intimidatory posture of an elephant. For those of you who've ever been on a bushwalk and have had a bit of a face-off with an elephant who's come closer to investigate, it really is quite the experience. I don't care who you are, it's very, very humbling, and requires a little bit of decorum on our behalf to just ensure we remain in control of ourselves. But as we always say, the nice thing about elephants is they're very, very emotive, and you can often read their body language, but they are truly enormous when they are directly in front of you. I always say it's like a two-story house. So with the shoulder height of a big elephant being a good 4 meters, and then with the additional height of a head that's being held high to give that intimidation pose, it is a substantial, substantial animal. There are, of course, ways to estimate the height of an elephant by looking at its tracks. There's a couple of different ways to do it. The most common, which I've actually sort of seen done in person, as it were, is to look at the front foot of an elephant. Now, when you do see an elephant track, it normally, in its natural rhythm, has a very distinct pattern. You've got the front foot placed down first and the back foot overlapping slightly, a slight overstep of the back foot, and very easy to tell the difference between the two tracks of an elephant. The front foot is very, very round. It's like a giant pillar supporting the weight of the shoulders, the head, the tusks, and the heaviest parts of the elephant, whereas the back foot is far more oval in shape. And we can see that if we get a chance to zoom in on the feet, but that front foot can give you a relatively accurate estimation of a given elephant's height. And the way you do that is you need some form of measuring device, a piece of string preferably, or rope. Otherwise, anything will work. A bit of cable, even a long grass stem, a shoelace. But if you measure the circumference, so the distance right the way around the edge of that track, and then multiply that by 2, that will give you the approximate shoulder height, normally to within about 10 or 15 centimeters of the elephant that left that track in question. Now, I know that doesn't sound like much, but the circumference of a big four foot of an elephant is, by the time you actually measure it out, you'll be amazed how much string you've needed. It will probably be around about 1.5 meters for a big adult, and double that, all of a sudden 3 meters, for you to sort of estimate that by you standing on a chair or standing on the bonnet of a car, to get a true idea of the shoulder height of that individual. There are some other interesting ways that have been designed or worked out for aging an elephant based on the evidence as well. And one of those ways is by looking at the dung. Obviously, as the elephant grows, so do the parts of its anatomy, and the size of an elephant's sort of average bolus, which is the fancy name for a dung ball that it produces. There is a formula that you can use that by measuring the diameter of a bolus, it'll give you a relatively accurate representation of the age of the animal that produced it. But that'll only work up until possibly sort of 25, 30 years of age. Then the elephant has pretty much reached full size, and there isn't a great deal of difference, but very useful for aging or estimating the age of young elephants when finding little boluses. And of course, you can also look at what is inside the elephant dung. As many of you will know, as an elephant gets older, its teeth start to deteriorate. It'll get its sixth and final set of teeth somewhere around the age of 35 to 40. And then as it begins to reach the end of its life, those teeth are so worn down that its ability to efficiently chew what it's eating, particularly that fibrous material, is very much hampered. And you'll see in the boluses of very old elephants, very undigested material compared to that of youngsters. But that in itself is a good thing for the environment. It's spreading out nutrients. You'll almost always find evidence of termites attacking elephant dung because of all the dead wooded material within it. And lots of other animals will make use of that as well, from mongooses to baboons. We saw some doing it the other day. Lots and lots of food sources in there. Countless little arthropods, particularly during the summer, living in the dung balls. Of course, very synonymous with the classic dung beetle activities that we all love during the summer months. But equally important from a distribution of seeds from the trees. There have been, I remember reading one report that in one big bolus of elephant dung, there were over 12,000 acacia seeds found in that one dung pile. And the fact that it's gone through the digestive tract and has been sort of prepped for germination and been deposited in a lovely ball of fertilizer means that the chances of a given seed germinating from a ball of elephant dung is about 75%, as opposed to less than 20% if just left to its own natural devices. So, despite the potential destructive force of elephants, they do play a massive role in seed dispersal and spreading out those seeds that cannot or are not motile on their own allows them to reach pastures greener from a seed perspective. Oh, Mohammed Gina, I see you've hit us with a dad joke first thing on a Sunday or Sunday afternoon. Why did the elephant bring a suitcase to dinner? To fill its trunk with leftovers. Classic. Reminds me of another one. Two elephants jumped off a cliff. Boom, boom. There are many, I'm sure. Whilst it's a slippery slope, any other elephant jokes, by all means, send them in. And Spuffs, you are very happy to have started the afternoon at Tenby, as we often have done of late. Strangely, O'Donnell, which has been the source of most activity, has been quite quiet over the last few days, but possibly on account of the waterhole drying up a little bit from the last time we visited. So definitely not quite the influx of animals over the last week or two that we've been seeing up there. As Bone notes, elephants can't just sort of suck up water through their trunk. They've got valves at the top, which so they can cut it off. If you've ever tried to sniff water up through your nose, it's not a very pleasant sensation at all. It's one of my pet peeves, actually, is like even going upside down in water, I have to be exhaling at all times. Otherwise, yeah, water gets into your sinuses and it's a really horrible experience. And the same would be true of an elephant. So no, they suck up water into their trunk, which can contain, depending on what you read, 4, 5, 6, 7 liters of water at a time, and then squirt it into the mouth. And they do the same for dust when they're picking up dust to throw onto their backs. They normally just scoop it up with those fingers, um, but they will obviously be getting large quantities of dust and things in the nostrils. But those valves at the top mean that they're not inhaling them the whole time. George Norris, you're asking of the temperature of the waterhole. Not sure if you're referring to the temperature of the water itself. That I wouldn't know, but weather forecasts for Tenby Elephant Park today are around about 29 degrees Celsius or 85 degrees Fahrenheit. So a lovely warm day without being exceptionally hot from African standards. The water itself will probably be relatively chilly. It is, say, our winter down here, so the ambient temperature has been fairly low. So the water won't be holding as much heat as it would in the summer months. But I wouldn't be comfortable giving you a temperature of the water itself. Here in Hoodspruit, it's a very pleasant 31 today. See lots of you commenting on this glorious vista in front of us. Michelle Brown commenting on the beautiful Ellies, aren't they just? And computer enthusiast. Happy Ellies wagging tails and flapping ears. And this beautiful boy approaching us here in the bottom left of the screen. Impressive animal, this one. Some good bulk on him. Mohammed, Gina, you wanting to know how long can the elephant's trunk get and how long can the tusks get? Well, obviously it is genetic. The record length of any tusk, I believe, is around about 3.5 meters. It's about the size of a small car, which is exceptionally impressive. And from a weight perspective, say those big tuskers can get in excess of 100 kilograms, maybe more. But so unfortunately, we don't see specimens like that very much anymore. So those genetics just don't exist after all of the hunting that has taken place, particularly for elephants over the last 150 years or so. So we don't get to see it very often, but occasionally a big tusker is spotted, and there are some fairly famous individuals around the continent. Lovely to see a herd of Inyala coming down to drink, all the females and youngsters, and then obviously a dominant um, bull there, Inyala bull, with that slate grey charcoal colour. Very striking individual. Computer enthusiast, you're asking what is the biggest herd of elephants I've ever seen. And I've been sitting here for the last 30 seconds or so trying to trawl through the memory banks for significant encounters. I've seen sort of many herds around sort of 30, 40, 50. That's not uncommon. I think the biggest herds that I've seen whilst doing live at the waterhole has been at Ukakoyu, where we saw one the other day, actually, which I think was probably a good 60 strong. Um, but personally, having seen with my own eyes, I'd probably go back to a time, wow, it's a long time ago now, but somewhere around about 10 years ago, I would think, that I saw in the southern section of the Sabi Sands. It was whilst I was working at Sabi Sabi, and in the north of the reserve, we had a beautiful big open area, and it's one of my favourite sightings of all time. Actually, I was on my way back to the lodge. It was well after dark. It was a very bright moon phase, very close to full moon, so we could see beautifully. And I often used to like driving with all the lights off and no spotlight, and just sort of enjoy the silhouettes. Things bathed in that gentle yellow light of the moon. Whilst we were on this open area, an enormous herd of elephants crossed in over the northern boundary, and they sort of spread themselves out over this huge area, multiple football fields in size, and there were definitely over 100 elephants there, and we were parked in the midst of them, and they were just moving around, and we watched them for probably half an hour. um, I don't think anybody said a word for a huge amount of time. We were just all in awe of watching these silhouettes of these elephants move around, listening to them feed and interact with each other, and just very much being amongst giants. It was a very powerful and emotive experience, that one, but that was a big, big herd. Speaking of incidents like that, it wasn't a particularly massive herd, but when I was down in Shamwari only a couple of weeks ago, we had an absolutely iconic sighting on the way back. We'd been out doing some stargazing activities and we were on our way back to the lodge. And of course, being down in the Eastern Cape, it's a lot more open there than I'm used to. And we were driving back, and off to our right was the horizon of this sort of open plain in front of us, at the top of a little incline, probably only about sort of 50 meters away. But the sky was so clear that night, stars twinkling absolutely everywhere, and we had this little sort of caravan of elephants walk along the crest of this ridge, silhouetted against the starry sky behind it. I mean, it was really something out of a picture book. It was an absolutely spectacular and memorable experience, one that will be etched into my brain for a long, long time to come. It's rare that you will find complete herds or one herd with that many individuals. That will probably be multiple individuals. Does happen around waterholes. Seen it in Kruger quite a few times, where you've got a herd of 20 or 30 drinking, and then another herd of 20 or 30 comes down, and the two sort of mingle together. There's always a very good chance that elephants within the same area know one another, particularly around a regular water source, because there isn't the requirement to go too far afield, especially if you've got youngsters. You don't want to have to trek to the other end of the Kruger Park, so it makes it easier to stay closer to those essential resources. So again, often when you see big groups, it will be multiple herds coming down and interacting with one another, rekindling some old friendships and some old bonds. And sometimes they don't get on, and you will see a little bit of um, interspecific competition between them. hope all of you do one day get a chance to view elephants in moonlight. It's a very, very special moment. There's a bit of frustration being shown by this youngster having been pushed out of his spot by the bigger individual. A little bit of a head flap. He's going to go back to his spot now, but it's always interesting to watch these little subtle interactions as hierarchies are formed or developed. Katvan, you're right. This is the perfect Sunday activity. Watching elephants and listening to bird songs. Unfortunately, the ambient sound doesn't translate too well to me, so hard for me to pick out any of those sounds, although there'll be some ones that I'm not too um, confident on. I would think down in Makutuland bush, slightly different species occurring down there. I have to say, having spent a lot of last year abroad, following some other interests for a little while, my bird calls are a little bit rusty. I've been out quite a few times since I've been back, and I'm forever being faced with, oh, I know that noise. What is it? Even some of what I would consider common birds. Um, Again, my brain recognizes the tune, recognizes the pitch, but it just can't make the association quick enough. But every time I hear one and figure out what it is, it just reinforces that cerebral link, and it seems to be embedded once again. but amazing how quickly those things disappear. It's a lot easier if you are musically inclined. People who play instruments or are actively involved in music seem to have a far better appreciation and ability to learn these bird calls. But for somebody who's tone deaf, like myself, it does take a little bit more discipline, but repetition, repetition, repetition is all important. And so always a good idea if you can come up with a sort of a little catchphrase that the bird song is saying to help you remember it, something that makes sense. Although in my experience, it doesn't work so well if you're sort of reaching for something that it says. If it doesn't resonate immediately with you, that the bird is saying some human words, if you will, from the tune. It's always good to learn bird calls in a group. We used to often do that in the training world. Because if somebody else says, "Oh, it's saying eat lots of bananas," or whatever it may be, your brain will go, "Yes, that's exactly what it's saying," and then you'll form that association with it. But much harder to come up with it on your own if there's nothing obvious that stands out. Nice to see some little warthogs coming down as well, and possibly the beginnings of a pool party. Party for one at the moment. So it's having a good soaking. See that network of veins beautifully on the back of the ears. All this cooling water will just help to regulate the body temperature, flapping the ears, cooling down the blood, sending it around the rest of the body. Poor warthogs. I'm sure they've been through it many times before, though you can see they didn't really pay too much attention. They're safe in the knowledge that they can escape if needs be. Rory, no, I've never noticed elephants avoiding water due to the temperature of the water being too hot or too cold. I imagine elephants wouldn't want to go too close to boiling water, but no, I haven't seen anything like that before. I think out in the wild, generally the water temperature remains relatively stable. It takes a lot more, um, say, time for water temperatures to change compared to environmental conditions. It's just a slower process of that coolness spreading between the molecules in the water than it does between the air. So no, the only reason really elephants will avoid water is if it is unpalatable or potentially there's toxins in it. But I've never experienced elephants avoiding water during too hot or too cold. Interesting though, I don't know if any research has been done on it, whether elephants would choose ice water over room temperature water, as it were, or warmer water. I mean, it is a well-known fact that warmer water is more easily absorbed by the body or more quickly absorbed by the body because by drinking iced water on a hot day, you're actually asking your body to first warm up the water before it can be properly absorbed into the system. This one's, how beautiful is this? But I don't know if any experiments like that have ever been done. But yeah, it'd be interesting. Give an elephant a choice of warm, cold, or room temperature water if there would be a preference. A good research project for someone to go and do. I wonder if elephants get sensitive teeth as well. Oh, but this is just beautiful, isn't it? And one very content elephant. Oh, somebody else has decided this is a good idea. Cat fan, as you just said there, your new expression, happy as an elephant in water. I don't think there are any other animals that can express their delight at being in water as well as an elephant can. If you can bottle it, it's such a lovely feeling. You can just see how happy they are, how much they're enjoying it, and it must be such a relief. The buoyancy of the water to make it nice and easy, and then just the general cooling action of it, it must feel delightful to an elephant. And I'm really surprised that they don't do it more than they do. Rather loving this little flash of orange in this Buddha bean tree there, what I believe to be a Buddha bean, hard to say for sure without actually being there and examining it, but it's almost like sort of a rebellious teenager putting an orange streak in the hair. But I assume just the way it's hanging, for whatever reason, that branch has succumbed to something. The chlorophyll has broken down, the green color has disappeared, and the ever-present reds and oranges within those leaves is now being fully revealed. So all of those leaves have that color. It's just the pleasant presence of chlorophyll from a manufacturing of energy perspective from sun and from carbon dioxide and photosynthesis that causes the leaves to develop the greener color. And then when autumn comes and the tree starts to close off those parts of its anatomy of its limbs, that chlorophyll again breaks down, but still traps some of the sugars in there. That's why even when the leaves fall to the ground, being orange, you'll still see various species feeding on them. A lot of browsing antelopes will eat fallen leaves, as will elephants. Some species of tree more popular than others, just due to the higher protein content within the leaves. It really is a beautiful splash of colour in the environment. So certainly the main reason that young leaves are often red in colour, rather focus on growing the leaf than worrying about photosynthesis. Leave that up to the adult leaves. Don't waste energy, put it all into the growth situation. And as a potentially a protective measure as well. It's screaming out to any potential foliage eating animal that these leaves are not particularly palatable, not particularly pleasant, and it may also act to ward off parasites as well. Most parasites of leaves are green to hide themselves from their predators whilst they're feeding. And if a young tree has red orange coloured leaves, any potential leaf parasite will be much easier to be spotted by its associated predator, and more likely that that tree or that leaf will not succumb to parasitic insects. June our rainy season will be starting in the next few months. We would normally expect, that's not very pleasant, Mr. Elephant. Other people have to use that water. But still, good food for the fish. Lots of bacteria and little microorganisms in there that will be hoovered up by the fish underneath the water. But June, sorry, yes. So normally we would expect the seasons to sort of change in October. And by the time we get into November, December, we would be in what we would consider our rainy season for the majority of the country. It is a little bit different down in Cape Town. That has a more of a Mediterranean climate in terms of when to expect poorer and better weather. But out here, so pretty much sort of December, January, February is when we would expect the bulk of our rains, and then things slow down after that. But yeah, your average rainfall will change very much depending on your area. Here in the Lowveld, up in the sort of the Hoedspruit Kruger area, normally around about, I'd say on average, 600 or 700 millimeters a year is what we'd expect, which doesn't sound like a lot. But that's the way it's been for a long time, and all the organisms have adapted to that repetitive cycle of wet and dry conditions. In East Africa, you tend to get two rainy seasons, a longer rains and a shorter rains. But for us, yeah, generally sort of between, let's say, October and March to April, peaking in midsummer. Warmer temperatures, I think a lot of water vapor rising or evaporating off the east coast, the Indian Ocean being carried inland, forming clouds and unstable conditions. A little bit of elephant yoga. Careful where you put your foot down. Yeah, nice to see another one having a little dip in the background there. I don't think I've seen very many elephants in that area of the waterhole. And we can have some pretty spectacular rainy seasons here. Great flashes of thunder and rumbles, so flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder. And if you get a really big storm, particularly more in the high felt than here in the low felt, but big electrical storms where you can have multiple flashes um, in the course of a minute, 4 or 5, really beautiful, and some pretty torrential rains at times as well. We occasionally do get some bad flooding here, flash floods. I remember one time many years ago we had about 450 millimeters of water in 24 to 48 hours that caused massive localized flooding. Whole areas just became oceans, dry riverbeds overflowed, and people had to be evacuated and choppered out from various lodges and locations. Damage was done to bridges, all sorts of things. I guess one elephant has decided this is his own private pool, not to be shared. Work out what this excuse me, what this elephant is doing here. It looks like there's a little channel there, possibly the inflow from a pipe, but doesn't seem to be drinking. Seems to actually be eating something, digging something up. So whether there's any little sort of young plants that are growing in that moisture that's trickling down there, or possibly even he's just eating some soil, known as geophagia, which we do see in a lot of animals in order to get extra minerals and certain chemicals that are required by the body. But definitely wasn't having a drink there, but popping something into his mouth. It's one at the back has dug himself a hole and is now sitting on it. Reminds me of a kid on the beach. Made myself a little mud puddle and I'm going to enjoy it since the other one's not letting me in. The one at the back is having an absolute blast, though. He's very much monopolised this waterhole, decided that this is his place of rest, his little oasis, and he seems to be intent on rolling around in every square inch of it. Like bubbles. I suppose anything will do with a little trunk rest, even your friend's head. How special is this just to watch these intimate moments, intertwining trunks, very important life lessons being learnt and bonds being created. Monkey Man, that's a good question. Why do elephants sometimes lift up their front feet and then sort of swing them back and forth? What does that mean in terms of body language? Well, we'll never know for sure, but in my personal experience, um, it's often a sign of unease or indecision. It's something that I normally look for if I'm out on a drive or on a walk and I see an elephant doing that, then it sort of makes me think, okay, we could be in for some sort of behavioral change here. It's almost like a little bit of displacement behavior, the equivalent of you fiddling with something because you're sort of unsure of what to do next. So to me, it's a sign of unease and consideration of whatever stimuli is going through the brain at that time. The other thing you might do is see them sort of rock forward onto their front feet and put a little bit of extra weight sort of on the toes. That's potentially some form of communication or picking up a form of communication, because just like on the tips of their trunks, we know that embedded in the soles of their feet, particularly around the front of their feet, around the toes, are these little nerve endings called Pacinian corpuscles, and they pick up potentially seismic vibrations in the ground. So, with the infrasonic sounds that elephants are capable of producing, those very deep rumbling noises that are below the range of human hearing. They do travel through the air, but they also travel very well through solid substrates like the ground. And it's a well-known fact that elephants pick up information being sent through the, well, not the airwaves, through the earth waves, I suppose, these seismic vibrations, which then potentially may resonate right the way up through the bones of the leg. If you kind of look where the shoulders are situated, it's very, very close to where the inner ear would be. So a lot of that information gets picked up by the feet and then sent through the body and interpreted by the inner ear. Well, this one's found a friend at least. I love the way they sort of sit on their haunches with just their heads above the water. You don't see them doing that very often on dry land. Sometimes the youngsters do it. It's a very amusing pose, I always think, for an elephant to sit like that, almost like a dog or a baboon. I've got a lovely photo somewhere of a young elephant sitting like that. It does look rather comical. Okay, well, we've been graced with some beautiful, beautiful visuals for over an hour now at Tenby Elephant Park. But I think we're going to try our hands somewhere else. Let's head over to Naledi. Sounds like we've got a nice big elephant bull on that camera. Oh, look at that. Good scratch time. So zoomed all the way up to Afrikaan's camera at Naledi Dam in Olifants West, an area that I have been to in the past. So I'm having a good scratch behind the ears. You can see all the mud caked on that trunk already. You see a favoured scratching post for many elephants in this area. It does look very satisfying. Also had a nice roll around in the mud. You can see a bit where that tree has been damaged by elephants in the past, but has healed itself. See the scar tissue that's built up around the edge of that tree. That won't do the tree any harm. You're making a hasty exit though, this one. A little bit camera shy, that bull. No evidence of anything else though. Okay, well, let's head up to Kenya to El Donyo, see what's going on up that neck of the woods. Amazing that we can zoom right up into East Africa now, all the way up to Kenya and African's Old Donyo waterhole. Looks like there might be. I'm just trying to work out if there is any more water in it. It's definitely got less over the last couple of weeks, but more than enough for these zebras to quench their thirst on a hot day. Beautifully lined up, I might add. Nice to have a look at the individual stripe patterns of these animals, all very similar, but all very unique if you look at the shape and size of those stripes, giving more precedent to the fact that every zebra stripe pattern is unique. Hello, yes, we're talking about you. You with your little black flash there on your rump. You see, note the absence of the shadow stripe that we expect to find in zebras down in the southern part of the continent. Still the same species, plains zebra, just those having that darker stripe, or that, sorry, that brownish stripe through the white areas further south. Definitely one of my favourites, these zebras. Mesmeric. Looks like three stallions, all look like boys. Anime asking what's the point of a harem? Well, a harem, for those of you who are unsure, is the social structure we generally attribute to zebras, where you'll have a stallion and a group of mares over which he is dominant and has mating rights. And ultimately, the latter part of that statement, the mating rights, is the point um, of a harem. It's easier to pass on your genetics if you feel you have control over a group of females, better opportunity to have successful mating and to rear young in a relatively stable environment. So it's just one way of achieving the same thing. Lots of different strategies employed by different animals, but zebras have gone for the harem idea. We've obviously come back to Tembe due to some little camera hiccups there. So these elephants still delighting us in the water. But remember, zebras are not territorial animals. Males are territorial over some females, but not over a particular area. So they don't defend an area or defend a territory in terms of geographical location, but they will defend the honor of his mares, of his females. The idea being just to sort of keep a core group of females that you can mate with, hopefully repeatedly, and for the case of the male, and pass on your genetics. These two at the back having a bit of a climb on each other. Yeah, I think we're going to quickly head over to Juma. It sounds like we might have a giraffe. Beautiful. Well, after over an hour at Tembe, we're flying around all the other cameras now. Nice to be back at Juma. So these giraffes taking the perilous trip off the dam wall down to the water's edge. One on the left seems to be a lot more flexible. Obviously not as big as the one on the right, but doesn't seem to be having any difficulty whatsoever in reaching down to the water. It's not normally, or it's normal to see a far more of an ungainly position being adopted by like the one on the right. One on the left has obviously been doing his stretching exercises. Looks like a young female on the left. Big bull at the back. We'll see if he follows this other female down. A beautiful sight. Sort of natural depression here forming the waterhole acts like an amphitheatre. Just imagine crowds lining the edge there enjoying this spectacle. It looks like a young male, this one in the front, but being shadowed by a bigger male. A little bit of dominance behaviour going on, methinks. Often you'll see a big bull following a female who's potentially coming into estrus. He's sort of trying to ward off any other potential male suitors. No, that was a young male. I thought it was a female. Could have just been coincidental, or say maybe just a little bit of intimidation from the big boy. How thin the lower part of those legs are to support such a large animal. But a bit like the elephant, very, very, very solid bone. Not much marrow in the center. Very, very heavy in terms of weight. If you find a giraffe bone, pick it up. Anime, you're right. Having a drink for a giraffe is a little bit risky in terms of being predated upon. Um, you're asking, do they only go down to drink if they know the water is good, like the elephants? Well, I think they can't afford to be too picky. I've seen giraffes drinking out of some fairly um, muddy puddles. I imagine it's a risk reward basis over the winter months when there is far less moisture to be gained from the vegetation that they are eating, from the browse that they are able to find. Then ultimately it's worth the risk, I think. I think a lot of it will be geographical location as well. If it's a really sort of enclosed waterhole with very limited visibility, I think they're far more unlikely to go down and would choose to rather um, move to another area where they know that they've got better visibility. But ultimately, these animals need water. They may be very water independent and have a very efficient digestive system for extracting the water from what they're eating. But in times like this, you can see from the surrounding area how dry it is. Water is water. Cat firm, back to the idea of harems. You're asking if it's consistent amongst other antelope. Well, in some cases, yes, but say it's just one of various strategies that are used, although possibly more commonly in antelopes than other animals. So impalas in the foreground here, they will also have a harem system. One male with multiple females, but only at very specific times of the year. It doesn't make sense to hold a harem for the entirety of the year if you're not going to be. Oh, here comes an Ellie. If you're not going to be able to mate with them because they all fall pregnant around about the same time, then there's no point holding on to um, those females because the job has already been done in that regard, and rather stick together in bigger groups for safety in numbers for an anti predation technique. Wildebeest, you could argue, do have a harem, but not sort of a traditional harem. Again, you're going to get a territorial bull who is dominant over an area and will take the opportunity to attempt to mate with any females who happen to come into his area, but he won't necessarily hold on to them. And if they leave that area, then he's not going to follow them. He'd rather keep his area and hope for more females to come through. And then you also do get monogamous pairings in antelope as well. Steenbok, Duiker, Klipspringer, Dik-Diks in other areas of the continent, all well known for being monogamous pairs. So harems do exist, certainly, but they are not necessarily the only reproductive strategy that antelope species will have. See if this Ellie's just going to come down and chase all the giraffe away. Got a bit of a Mexican standoff going on. Wouldn't be surprised if the elephant decides to go and drink exactly where the giraffe is standing, just to prove a point. No, he's going to give him a wide berth. And the assumption the elephant is not just passing through, might be headed down to this slightly more mudded area for a bit of a mud bath and a bit of a spray, as opposed to a traditional drink. Creating some lovely mud by scraping his feet through the mud there and scooping it all up on that trunk and very, very accurately delivering it to this part. The peanut gallery watching on. Why would you do that? What a mess. Giraffe, far too regal and prim and proper themselves in mud, I would think. Imagine seeing a giraffe having a mud bath, though. That would be one for the camera reel. Milo, have I noticed that elephants have a technique when they're throwing mud, or do they just wing it? Or trunk it, perhaps, would be more suitable. No, they definitely have a technique. They'll spray the majority of it on their underside, along their bellies, and up behind their ears. Um, but they're surprisingly accurate. They don't waste much mud. They've obviously done it many, many times before, but as I said, it'll be more of a sort of a scooping of the mud using the trunk, almost like a ladle. And then, as you can see there, delivering the mud to whichever areas they feel need the most. But that's generally around the belly to help with the heat radiating off the ground, behind the ears to help with their thermoregulation, and of course the back, which is bearing the brunt um, of that potent sunshine. And I would imagine if you actually did track individuals and their mud bathing habits, you'd find that they would probably do it the same way every time, and it might be different from another individual. It'll just be what they've learnt from themselves, what they've learnt from interactions with others, from their mothers and from their siblings when they were younger. They'll figure out what works best for them. And I would imagine that they would repeat a very similar pattern of how and where the mud is being splashed based on that experience, unless there's a particular need for it in a certain area. Which you can see this one has given himself a pretty even coating in a very short space of time. There, a big mixed herd of impalas scattered around the area. So as I said before, they do have a harem, but it's closer to what we were discussing with the wildebeest. It is a very seasonal thing. But again, male impalas will establish their territories and they will hold their territories and hope that females will come a calling. The most dominant males will hold the best territories and therefore be most likely to attract females into that area. But if the females do leave, they will do their best to herd the females and to keep them in that area, but they won't follow them into a neighboring male's territory. That is somebody else's home, and it's sort of you win some, you lose some situation. So the difference between that and the zebra's harem says the zebras won't defend an area. They will follow those females wherever they go, and they stay together as a unit for a prolonged period of time. And any male that wants to establish his own harem will either have to grab some youngsters from elsewhere or have to steal females from a pre-existing harem from another male, which is why zebras do often scrap with each other, the stallions, and you'll often see stallions with bits of tail missing because they have a tendency to bite each other's tails during fights. The giraffe don't really have any kind of breeding strategy like a harem at all. They're fairly independent of one another, but if a female is giving off the right signals and the right pheromones and smells, a male will track her down, do his thing, and then he'll head off and lead a relatively to an extent, solitary existence again. Same is true of things like kudus and inyalas as well. The males often sort of hang out in little bachelor groups. If they get wind of a female in estrus, they'll track down the source of that scent, do what needs to be done, and disappear again. No form of parental care in that regard. Waterbuck, males territorial, hoping for females. So waterbuck similar to the wildebeest. So lots of different strategies amongst antelopes in general. I would say aren't that many that form pure harems that will stay together and move through an area like that, like zebras do. Still, despite the more difficult conditions, I think that male was just giving a chase to the female. But say not much to fight over for all the male impalas now. Most herbivores will be pregnant, coinciding their births with the onset of the rainy season. So no point holding a territory for now and risking being out on your own with all the predators, particularly in this area. But no harm in chancing your arm just in case. Okay, it was a lovely little visit to Juma's waterhole, though. I think we're going to see what's happening at Cateye Pan next. Another elephant quenching said thirst. And possibly creating a little bit of mud. Let's see where he decides to adorn himself. Not quite sure. Looks a bit distracted. Shall I eat? Shall I drink? Shall I cover myself in mud? Too many choices. Where's the rest of your family, little one? A little bit young to be out on his own. Oh, there's another one. There we go. Very long tail that one seems to have. Does look a little bit restless and unsure of himself there, this youngster. Or whether he's already ready to go, wants to move on. And here come the rest. But I get the impression this little one on the left is bored. He just seems to be sort of ambling around, is now copying some of the other adults. Maybe he's hungry and wants to get back to feeding. He's had enough water. It seems to be a little bit, yeah, undecided as to the course of action at the moment. Had a half-hearted dust bath, had a half-hearted drink. Candy Canyon, would the water at Tembe be cleaner due to all the reeds acting like a filter? Potentially, yes. It does look like nicer water. Obviously, both are being fed artificially, and that's you will normally find the elephants gathering where the freshest water is coming in. But yes, absolutely, reeds, in particular sedges and things, are natural filtration units. We use that to our advantage as well. They sort of absorb toxins out of the water. So quite possibly, it's a much larger body of water, though perhaps. So whether or not that effect is nullified by the sheer amount of water, I'm not 100% sure. But it's something that we as humans have known for a long time, that these aquatic plants can help to stabilize the quality of the water, and it's been used in history as well. So some of the sedges, apparently for the Bushmen, if they were transporting water over longer distances, they might do so by using a cracked ostrich shell, or a ostrich shell with the top taken off, as a vessel for the water. And then apparently it was quite normal to put sedges inside it, and that would um, cause the possibility of that water to last a lot longer. It would preserve the possibility of that water by up to 4, 5, 6, 7 days, apparently, because the sedges absorb some of the toxins that are building up and the bacteria in that water. So certainly a possibility, but without doing a full-blooded sort of survey of the water, it will be hard to tell. When people do surveys of the water, they'll often look at the arthropods within it, if it's not chemical testing. So lots of different arthropods have very specific niches that they need in water, and it's one of the ways that water quality is tested, by actually sort of taking samples and seeing what else is living in the water. And you'll only find certain insects in water with a certain level of clarity and health. But arthropods can be useful in that vein. We see it in forensics, because there's a very, very specific periods and timings between when certain insects will lay their eggs in decomposing material, and how long it takes those particular species to hatch. It is one of the ways that time of death is established quite accurately, by looking at the microorganisms and the larvae and things that are found within decomposing flesh. So you've got a bit of a scrum over the cleanest water there, and the big ones just come in and nudged everybody else out the way. Got some ears being raised here to the right. What's off to the right? These elephants have seen something they're not very happy with. Could we have a cat? Definitely something off to the right, I think. I don't know if we can pan the camera and check. I seem to remember a month or two ago we did have a few lions that actually were on their way down to Pan and got chased off by a few elephants. But both of those ellies had their heads high, looking down their trunks at something, ears spread out. Looming shadow of an approaching elephant's quite cool. Ah, that's what they were looking at. Some kudus on their way down to drink. Ah, you might want to wait your turn, kudus. Wishful thinking for a cat, but you never know. It's always a good idea to look at animals' reactions. They will see things and hear things often long before we do. So you note again we've got no male kudu with these three females. The males, of course, with those beautiful spiraling horns. So it's probably safe to assume that none of these kudus are in estrus, which would also make sense. They will probably all be pregnant at the moment, waiting for the first rains. So no harem structure in kudus, just an opportunistic manner that the males will take. But these kudus might be waiting a while for an opportunity to quench their thirst. So again, we just saw that swaying foot that we were talking about earlier, whether or not that's just because the kudus are around and there's a little bit of thought process as to what's going on, but you can kind of see now picking around at the ground, not really quite sure what to do. So very much, and again, in my experience, it's just a little bit of indecision more than anything else. Not quite sure, am I comfortable doing this? Am I a little bit distracted, a little bit unsure of myself? I see it very much as sort of the cogs turning in the elephant's brain as to what to do next, to settle on a course of action. So that's, yeah, it is a nice way to end the show. We are inside the last 5 minutes now. We've started with elephants. In fact, we've pretty much had elephants the entire afternoon. They're normal for this time of year, but very, very special. And we've seen some beautiful views down at Tembe there, with elephants playing in the water and all sorts of fun little interactions. Definitely been an elephant day. I think these kudus have decided that we'll come back a little bit later when things are not quite so crowded. It looks like the elephants are beginning to disperse a little bit. Getting ready for the sunset safari, of course. They've come to look their best. It looks like slowly the message has got round to everybody that it is time to move on. Oh, we are almost out of time. Only a minute or so to go, but don't forget to stay tuned. Catch up with what's been happening over the last few days with our teams across the country in preparation for the Sunset Safari, which will start at around about 3:30 Central African time this morning. And of course, there'll be another live at the Waterhole tomorrow between 1 and 3. I am done for the month now. I'm sure I will be back again at some point in the near future, and so failing that, I'm very much looking towards the end of November. But thanks very much for joining me. Thank you for your comments. Thank you for your questions. It's definitely been a day of elephants today. But your plans are, I hope they go well for the rest of this beautiful Sunday afternoon.
Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you so much for joining us once again for our highlight show on this lovely Sunday afternoon. It's nice and sunny, it's warm, it is magnifique, and we are coming directly here from Ajuma Private Game Reserve in the northern Hasabi Sands. And well, in the next few minutes or next half an hour, we'll be discussing a few highlights. My name is Cedric, and that is Paul. Well, we are here on safari.